Hello everyone, and welcome to part 3 of how to make Breakout in Unity. We got it so our ball bounces off the sides of the screen along with our bat. So in this video, we are going to fix the issue where, as you can see here, once it passes through the bottom of the screen, it just disappears. Well, technically it's just still falling. And we are going to make it so once it passes the bottom collider, it resets to just above the bat. And then we are going to make it so you can decide which direction the ball is going to launch based on your last input onto the keyboard. So let's get started by opening up our ball controller script. So what we want to do in here is track for when you pass through the collider on our game object named bottom. So in here we are going to say void on trigger enter 2D collider 2D, and then we have to name it, so I'm just going to name it hit. So what this function does is on the first frame, and only on the first frame, it allows you to perform some sort of action in here. So specifically, what I want to do is just move it back to our bat at just a reasonable height above it. So the way I do that is if hit, and that's why I had to name it here, dot game object dot name equals bottom, I want to do something in here. Now what this code is saying is if I pass through a trigger type collider on a game object named bottom, I want to do this. And the specific actions I want to do is set isKinematic to false, and then I want to set the velocity to a new vector 2 with 0, 0 in order to stop it from moving. And then I want to set canMove to false. And after all that, I want to say transform.position equals a new vector 3, because this time there are 3 components to your position, an X, Y, and a Z. Now this is where the ball being a child of the bat comes in really handy, because these coordinates are relative to the position from the bat. So if I want it to be centered in and above our bat, all I have to do is set X to 0, Y to 0.65, and Z to 0. So 0, 0.65, and 0. And I just realized that I made a small mistake. This needs to be transform.local position. So something to keep in mind when you say transform.position, it's referring to real-world coordinates, and if you're modifying the position of a child, it tends to mess things up. So if you want to make sure you get the position of the child correct with respect to the position of the parent, use local position. So by saying transform.local position, we make sure that it's going to be centered over our bat, a reasonable distance above our bat, and on the same position in the Z axis. So I'll just go into the play mode and see what's going on. We have our bat, passes through our collider, and it's now on our bat. However, if I were to press space, it doesn't go anywhere. What we need to do is make it so it knows precisely which direction to launch in after you press space. And then based on that, it will change the velocity and just let it bounce like we were having it do. So let's go into our ball controller script, and this is what we're going to use canMove for. Okay, I just realized something. I made a small mistake. We want to isKinematic to be true here. In fact, we can take our velocity and move it to canMove. And the reason is, when we set canMove to false after you touch the collider, the very next frame it's going to find out that canMove is false and that it should change its position, and then it will set the velocity to 0 and make it so it moves with the parent object. And this is stuff you have to look out for, where you can make optimizations in order to remove redundant code, because it was kind of pointless to set isKinematic to true, and then the very next frame we also set it to true in a different function. So now that that's out of the way, we do not want to immediately start with some velocity. Instead, we want to change it in our canMove. So in canMove, we are going to either have our rb.velocity be equal to a new vector 2 for -5, 5 or 5, 5. And I'm just going to uncomment this bit of code. And there we go. And the first thing I have to do here is set isKinematic to false, just because it's logical to want your rigid body to react towards physics before you actually start moving it. Now what we can do is create another public static bool, and what this will be called is, let's have move left. And what this will do is, if move left, we're going to launch it left, and if move right, if not move left, we're going to assume that you want to move it to the right. Also, if you want, you don't always have to use these curly braces at the end of an if statement, but this will only activate the very next line. So what this says, this is basically the same as writing this. So if you have one statement after your if statement, it's fine to not to have curly braces. Otherwise, it's just good practice to use curly braces. So we have our move left, and now we have this back controller. Here we are going to activate ball controller dot move left. We're going to set it true when you press left arrow, and we're going to set it false when you press the right arrow. And because of this, the direction that the ball launches will be based on the last key you pressed. Let's just check our code. One thing I need to do is set this to false on the first frame. Otherwise, our ball is just going to launch and it would kind of defeat the purpose. So, now if I were to go right and press right, okay, that's a bit of a problem. And if I go to left and press left, it launches. And as you saw there, it is getting stuck. The reason why is because we are constantly making our velocity to be -5, 5 or we're constantly changing the velocity. And because of that, when it bounces off of one of the walls, it's just being told to go the same direction. And what we want to have happen is for the velocity to change. So this code is a bit buggy. One thing that's going on is that we're able to change our velocity of the ball mid-flight. So there's several changes we need to make in order to get our ball working as we want it to. First thing I want to do is change this can move to can move freely. So what this is going to do is just see if we can move our ball freely around, or if it will be dictated by the direction of our bat. Now in here, we only want to make it so if the ball controller dot can move is false, we want it so basically when it cannot move freely, we make it so you can change which direction the ball is going to launch. This way you cannot change the direction mid-flight. Second, since we're going to make it so can move freely dictates how it flies, we're no longer going to access this code here. Instead, we're going to do it here because can move freely is going to dictate whether or not it can bounce off of anything. So now, if I were to go into the test scene and fire our ball, it fires freely, but it still has this problem. This is because as long as it can move freely, it's going to be changing our velocity. So what we need to do is one more thing. We need to set can move freely to false. And what this will do is check if you can move freely, which is activated by pressing space. And then it'll launch your ball in a given direction based on your last input on the keyboard. And then it'll tell it, no, you cannot move freely. And it will stop updating the velocity unless it bounces off something. And then once you pass through the bottom trigger, we say it cannot move freely, which is actually a little redundant, so let's get rid of that. We're going to set our rigid body to be kinematic. We're going to stop it from moving, and we are going to change its local position. Now, when I enter the game view, click play, and launch our ball, as you can see, it went into the direction I wanted it to. I stay put, and I can keep firing it, and as you might expect. Now that all that's taken care of, in the next episode, we are going to make it so it can collide with these blocks, and that the blocks get destroyed. We may even give the blocks a special particle effect that matches the color. So, in preparation, I'm just going to set our blocks back to their position. Actually, we're only going to keep one of them, so I'm going to delete these. So anyway, thank you for watching. If you have any questions or suggestions on how to improve the series, please let me know. And I hope you stay tuned for the next episode. Goodbye.